Hi, I'm Neil Beck. I was a doctor in Perth, Western Australia for 53 years, and I had 500,000 consultations, hospital and home visits. And saw almost everything and did almost everything to do with health. Well, some of it I only helped. But we'd not had a medical school in Perth until 1959, so we were short of specialists. So family doctors did lots of things that specialists do now, and I helped to bring 800 babies into the world, and I treated lots of tummy and chest and head things. did lots of appendicectomies and tonsillectomies and vasectomies, and helped to mend broken hearts and broken families and broken homes. The conclusion I came to was there are no perfect mums and dads, families or homes, no perfect streets or communities or schools. So every child has some suffering in their childhood that causes them some mental health problems. The popular idea is only a few people got mental health problems. I think everyone's got mental health problems. Fortunately, some not very bad, and unfortunately some terrible, but because there were no perfect mums, dads, homes, families, streets or schools, every child had some suffering and got some mental health problems. And the conclusion I reached was that the three most important things to have a good life were, first of all, to grow your mental health, to find your mental health problems and fix them and grow your mental health. Secondly, to grow enough good relationships, and that was quite heavily related to your mental health. People with bad mental health tended to have trouble with their relationships. People with good mental health tended to have good relationships. And the third thing was not to have any addictions. So to have a happy, healthy life, grow your mental health, build enough good relationships, and don't have any addictions. There are four other things that are very important. So the fourth one is have high endorphins chemistry. Endorphins is short for endogenous morphines, because our brain and our glands produce over 20 morphine-like chemicals called endorphins, and they help to stop pain and stop distress and make life much more comfortable. So you want to have high endorphins. And also, endorphins manage your immune system, and it's very important to have a strong immune system. So it's very important to have strong endorphins, because the immune system fights infections, allergies, inflammation, autoimmune diseases and cancers. And if your immune system is weak, then you get infections, you get inflammation, you might get autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis, and you might get cancer. Sadly, my younger brother died 2 years ago at the age of 84 from leukemia. And leukemia is a blood cancer, and I'm sure that because both our parents lived to be 97, he shouldn't have died at 84. But unfortunately, he had some very bad things happen to him. He was too ambitious. We left school at 14 from a local bush school, and by 28 he had a PhD and he was a professor of education at Toronto University. But Toronto University is on the other side of the world, and that created stress, and he was so ambitious that created stress. He became the chairman of the North American Educational Association and used to chair meetings with 3,500 people. And he had a son who was born 12 weeks premature. And babies born 12 weeks premature have 4 times the risk of mental health disorders, and his son had mental health disorders. And then they often have addictions. And sadly, his wife had been affected by the Nazi killing of Jewish people. His wife was of Jewish descent, and her father had been murdered by the Nazis, and that affected her, which affected him. So you want to have high endorphins to cut the pain and to cut the distress and to boost your immune system so that you stay healthy and you don't get sick. So the fifth thing is good physical health, which depends on your lifestyle and your diet and your exercise and so on, but also on your immune system. And the sixth thing is to have a good home. One of the great things about being mentally healthy is that you usually end up having a good home. And one of the terrible things about having bad mental health is that you may end up homeless. And there are thousands and thousands of homeless people. And the homelessness is a great problem, but the greatest problem is the mental ill health that caused them to be homeless. And the seventh important thing is good employment. Most of us have to work 40 hours a week, and it's important that that 40 hours be work that we enjoy, that's safe, that doesn't put it at risk, and that pays them well enough for us to have a good lifestyle. So, mental ill health. What are the main mental health disorders? Well, the Bible of the psych industry, which is the DSM-5, says there are 500 mental health problems, but I found there were about 10 main ones. Worry, anxiety was the commonest. So general anxiety, social anxiety, separation anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, phobias, different phobias. So that was the commonest mental health disorder. Then there's sleep disorders, which were related. Inability to go to sleep, waking up during the night, waking up very early in the morning and unable to go back to sleep, sleep disorders. The third is major depression. Depression is so common. About 1 person in 10 in developed countries is on antidepressant medication, so depression is a big one. And bipolar is a big one. Bipolar is when people are sometimes very high and fast and racy, and sometimes very slow and low and depressed. And then there's ADD, ADHD, very poor focusing and concentration and great impulsiveness. Sometimes with hyperactivity, in which case it's called ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but sometimes there's daydreaming ADD, where people just sit there and gaze out the window. Boys are more likely to have the ADHD, and girls are more likely to have the daydreaming ADD. Then there's post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, where a person has a terrible experience, usually a life-threatening experience, sometimes usually to them, but sometimes observed at very close quarters, someone else having a life-threatening experience, and they have a terrible reaction. They have terrible memories, but they also shake and shiver and perhaps sweat and perhaps pee, and then that experience keeps on coming back and repeating until it's a sort of a habit that can hit them at any time. And it's not just a bad memory, it's the bad bodily reaction. the shaking, the sweating, the nausea, the vomiting, and then there's another one which I called PTEF. Didn't have a name, so I gave it the name PTEF, which is post-traumatic evil focus. That is people who have something that's so bad that happens to them that they can't bear it, and they escape it. And they escape it with alcohol or drugs or some other addiction, or by focusing on terrible things happening in faraway places. They try to escape from the terrible thing that happened right here to them or to someone very close to them by focusing on the terrible things that are happening somewhere else. Guantanamo Bay, the CIA, and conspiracy theories, post-traumatic evil focus. Then there's crashed self-esteem. Some people have very low self-esteem and self-confidence. They came from very poor circumstances, and they were street kids, or they had very critical parents, and they developed an inferiority complex, and have a very low opinion of themselves and very low confidence. And then there's schizophrenia, hallucinations, delusions, and then there's autism. Autism is a fairly diverse disorder with various forms of difficulty with relationships and so how come I know about all these mental health disorders when I was just a family doctor, just a GP, not a psychiatrist? Well, it's because in the late 1990s in Perth we had a terrible epidemic of heroin addiction, and people were dying like flies from overdosing on heroin, and young people were saying to me that they were the last person standing in their group of friends. All the others had died with a heroin overdose. I still remember one young man who came to Perth, which is at one end of Australia, from Queensland, which is the other end of Australia, and he told me that he'd been a drug dealer in Queensland, and he saw so many deaths, and sometimes he had $70,000 in cash under his bed from drug sales, but he felt that he was going to die if he didn't get out of that, so he came to Western Australia. But then we found that he had serious attention deficit disorder. So when we were having, Perth is such an isolated city that we didn't get a lot of the addictions till later than other cities like American cities or European cities, but it hit us in the late 1990s. Heroin everywhere, heroin addiction everywhere, heroin death. So I thought I'd better learn about heroin, so I started to work 10 hours a week in a heroin clinic. 10 hours a week in an addiction clinic. But 99% of the addiction was heroin, 1% alcohol and other things. And I wanted to know what caused addiction. Why do people become addicts? In health, you always want to know the cause. If you know the cause of a problem, it's much easier to get that problem better. And if you don't know the cause, even if you get the person better and they still got the cause, they're going to relapse. So terribly important to find the cause. So I asked all the people in Perth at the addiction clinics what caused addiction. They didn't know, didn't even think they should know, didn't think it was important. I thought it was very important, so I went to Sydney and I asked at about 10 different clinics in Sydney, including the government heroin injecting clinic, and nobody could tell me what caused addiction. And when I came back to Perth, one day in the clinic where I was working 10 hours a week, I saw 15 heroin addicts, and I realised that 5 of them had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And when I talked to them about their life story, it was apparent that they had the ADD, ADHD since early childhood, had made them problem children, and then there were problems in the classroom. They disturbed the class, they copped a lot of flack from the teachers, always being sent to the headmaster's office, and they got a poor education, and they ended up leaving school early and having poor employment or unemployment, and they were very troubled. And if they didn't get treatment for their ADD, ADHD, then a lot of them got street treatment. And a lot of them became heroin addicts in their teens or their 20s. And then once I realised that a third of the heroin addicts had ADD, ADHD, I looked very carefully, and that's when I discovered that 95% of them, 19 out of 20 of them, had the mental health disorders. Usually 2 or 3 mental health disorders, not just 1, 2 or 3. ADD, ADHD, anxiety, worry disorders, major depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic evil focus disorder, schizophrenia, autism. And it became apparent to me that what happened was that people who had serious mental health illnesses often couldn't get treatment for their mental health illness, and they ended up in desperation trying something on the streets and getting relief on the streets, but becoming an addict. Because everything that's sold on the streets is addictive. They just want your money. They want you to be. An addict so that they can get all your money. So addiction was really stage 4 mental illness. And the problem was that none of the addiction clinics were addressing the mental health problems. It was very hard to get people off heroin, and if they managed to get anyone off, they usually relapsed fairly soon because they still had their mental health problem, which was what had caused them to take drugs and to become an addict. So then I realised that I needed to treat addicts with dual diagnosis. Dual diagnosis is diagnosing and treating their mental illness and treating their addiction at the same time. And when I did that, lots and lots of them got better. Not all of them, of course, not all of them, but if someone was a heroin addict because they had ADD and we fixed their ADD, they could get off the heroin much easier and they didn't relapse. If someone had terrible panic attacks and anxiety, I still remember, sadly, one young fellow, probably mid-20s, big tall fellow, who used to drink 6 litres of wine a day, 6 litres of wine a day, and fall asleep down by the river, wake up the next morning covered with mosquito bites. And he had terrible anxiety disorders, and those anxiety disorders had driven him to alcohol, and he became an alcoholic. And the only way to get him off the alcohol was to fix his anxiety disorders. And I didn't know enough then to be very successful. but I then knew I had to learn to be successful. I had to learn, and that wasn't very difficult because I got swamped with cases, because there were all these people who came to my clinic because they could get mental health care instead of the big government clinics where nobody took any notice of their mental health problems. They could have very obvious, very serious mental health problems and nothing was done about it. And so what happened was that they were put on addictive medicines. The only way they could stay off heroin was to take methadone. And methadone's about 5 times as addictive as heroin. And drown their mental illness with methadone instead of heroin. A little bit better than heroin, but not a lot better. And gradually what happened was that I got swamped. My one-man clinic got swamped, and because I was doing dual diagnosis, treating their mental health as well as their addiction, and they couldn't even go to a mental health clinic and get addiction and get mental health treated because the government, the free government, they couldn't afford private psychiatrists and psychologists, and the government clinics, mental health clinics, would not see addicts. If you were an addict, you just couldn't get an appointment at a mental health clinic, so you were down the drain. And because of all these people getting repeats again and again and again for methadone, there were long waiting lists at the big government clinics. At the big government 6-doctor clinic, there was a waiting list of 8 weeks when I opened my clinic. 8 weeks, you come to the clinic, I've got to get off heroin. Oh, come back in 8 weeks, come back in 8 weeks. Well, a lot of them, I had to sit in at that clinic to be taught how to treat addicts. And what I actually learnt was how not to treat addicts. Because what I saw was that these people who were told to come back after 8 weeks, only 40% of them came back. 60% of them didn't come back. 60% of them had gone to hospital, gone to prison, gone to a cemetery, or were working on the streets selling drugs to pay for their own addictions. But because at my clinic we were actually making people better, the waiting list at the big public health clinic gradually started to shorten, and 17 months after I opened my clinic, their 8-week waiting lists had gone to 0. They had no waiting lists. So they were worried about that. They thought this little 1-doctor clinic was going to put them out of work. So they just wrote me a letter, no discussion, just wrote me a letter and said, "You're not following our guidelines, you can't prescribe methadone." No, sorry, at that time we graduated from methadone to Subutex. You can't prescribe Subutex. And they didn't think I'd prescribe methadone because I said I thought methadone was worse than rat poison, so they didn't bother to ban me from doing that. But what then happened is people kept coming to me and saying, "Look, Subutex is much better than methadone, but methadone and mental health care is better than Subutex and no mental health care." So I got busy again prescribing methadone because they hadn't banned me from doing that, and treating their addiction, treating the mental health and addiction together. So after about 2 years, I got another letter from the public health department saying that I was banned from prescribing methadone, and then they banned me from prescribing mental illness. I was not allowed to treat addiction, and I was not allowed to treat mental illness because they thought they were going to lose their jobs. it was such an embarrassment to them to go from having an 8-week waiting list to having no waiting list, and a little one doctor clinic fixing people that they didn't fix. So I had to go back to family practice. But then I got a bit sick of all that, and I retired. And in retirement, I'm working on the treatment of mental health and addiction with non-addictive medicines that don't require special bureaucratic approvals. Methadone and Subutex required every single case you saw. Before you could prescribe it, you had to ring up and get permission from a government pharmacist to prescribe the medicine, and he'd never seen the patient, he never treated patients, but he's the one that could say whether you could or you couldn't prescribe Subutex, or then it was Suboxone or Methadone. So I started to treat heroin addiction successfully without addictive medicines. It's an interesting story. In about 1960 in the US, they discovered that heroin worked through opiate receptors, which were little landing strips on a person's cells. And these little opiate receptor landing strips, the heroin would land on that little opiate receptor and have its effect. So they thought, well, if we can make a medicine that blocks those opiate receptors, that's going to block heroin. So they worked away, and in 1963 in Long Island, New York, they synthesized naltrexone. And naltrexone blocks opiate receptors very strongly. And so it totally blocks heroin, it totally blocks opioid painkillers, because there were 50,000 Americans a year dying from opioid painkillers, and it blocks alcohol, which also works through opioid receptors. But they got the dose wrong. And Dr. Bernard Bahari, who was New York's addiction commissioner in 1984, had 41 methadone clinics in New York, and was looking for something better. So he tried naltrexone, and he gave naltrexone tablets to these heroin addicts, and they wouldn't stay on them. And he realized that it was because the naltrexone tablets were just far too strong. They were 50 milligrams. And if you take 50 milligrams of naltrexone, you get terrible side effects. Well, what happens is it blocks your opiate receptors, which blocks your endorphins, your natural pain-killing and stress-relieving chemicals, your endorphins. So Dr. Bahari very wisely tried 1 to 10 milligrams of naltrexone instead of 50 milligrams, and found that 3 milligrams was the best. 3 milligrams of naltrexone blocks your opiate receptors for 3 hours. In that 3 hours, your brain and glands fights back and tries to override the blockage by producing 250 to 300% increase in endorphins. And when the 3 hour naltrexone, 3 milligram naltrexone wears off, all those extra endorphins make the patient feel like they've had heroin. They feel great, and they can stop the heroin, and they don't relapse. Fantastic. Except there was a problem. The problem is that they can't even take 3 milligrams of naltrexone unless they stop the heroin or the opioid painkillers for 3 days, and that was very, very difficult. So something else happened at that time, and that is that they discovered they had HIV in New York. They didn't know that they had HIV, and a lot of the people that they thought were dying for heroin were actually dying from HIV. And they got much more worried about HIV than about heroin. They thought that HIV was going to wipe out whole cities. So Dr. Bahari stopped worrying about heroin and worried about HIV. And in addition to that, he started to treat cancer cases with low-dose naltrexone, because they found that about 50% of people with cancer, if they were given 3 milligrams of naltrexone and it boosted their endorphins by 250 to 300%, that boosted their immune system enough to kill the cancer. Now, it didn't work for everyone. As far as I could tell from reading the records, and you can check, just check Dr. Bernard Bahari, New York Addiction Commissioner, 1984. About half of the cancer cases that he treated with low-dose naltrexone got better. He treated about 350 cases. The first case he treated was the widow, a very close friend of his, and she had a malignant lymphoma. She'd had it 5 years before and treated with chemotherapy and got better, but then had a relapse after 5 years. And then they said that the chemo wouldn't work the second time, or it didn't work the second time. And she, her husband had died, who was a very close friend of Dr. Bahari, but she asked Dr. Bahari, and Dr. Bahari put her on low-dose naltrexone, and her lymphoma went away, and she lived another 9 years and died of an unrelated heart attack. And then in 1986, Dr. Bahari went to a conference in Paris, and at this conference in Paris he met a woman doctor who had 4 spreads of malignant melanoma in her brain. She had 4 patches of malignant melanoma in her brain from a skin cancer, and she was on her way out, and he put her on low-dose naltrexone, and she lived for another 18 years. So he focused on HIV, on infection, and on cancer, and forgot about the heroin. I didn't know about any of this because I got my first laptop in 2008, but it was under my bed for the first 3 years before I learned how to use it. But what I thought, I could tell that 50 milligrams was much too much. So I tried 15 milligrams, that was too much. 13 milligrams, too much. 11, 9, still too much. 4.5 milligrams. 4.5 milligrams was pretty good if you could get them onto it, but the problem was that they had to stop the heroin for 3 days before they could tolerate the opioid blocking naltrexone. But at that time I could still prescribe Subutex. So what I did was I gave them Subutex for 3 days, which got them off the heroin without becoming addicted to Subutex. They would become addicted to Subutex if they were on it for a month or more. And then I'd switch them from the Subutex to the 3 milligrams of naltrexone, low-dose naltrexone, and then they stopped me from prescribing Subutex. So then what I did was I thought, okay, 50 milligrams of naltrexone was too much. 3 milligrams was much better, and they could easily tolerate that once they'd had no heroin for 3 days, but they couldn't tolerate it till they'd stopped the heroin or their opioid painkillers for 3 days. So I tried everything from 1/8 of a milligram to 1.5 milligrams of naltrexone, and I called that micro-dose naltrexone, not low-dose naltrexone, which was 3 milligrams, but microdose. And what I found was that without stopping, when they stopped heroin, if they started to crave, if I gave them 3/4 of a milligram of microdose naltrexone, that stopped their craving for about an hour. Obviously what was happening was that when they had no heroin and they started to withdraw, that was because some of their opiate receptors were empty. So the microdose of naltrexone went to those empty ones. Didn't push the heroin away, it just went to the empty ones. Then after an hour, there's more empty ones. They started to crave again and give them another 3/4 of a milligram. So I gave them 3/4 of a milligram of microdose every hour for 10 hours. I called that RMN, repeated microdose naltrexone. And after they had repeated microdose naltrexone every hour for 10 hours, they could take 1.5 milligrams of naltrexone every 2 hours. And after they'd taken 1.5 milligrams every 2 hours for 36 hours, they could tolerate 2.25 milligrams every 3 to 5 hours. And soon they'd been off the heroin for 3 days, and then they could tolerate low-dose naltrexone, and then all they needed was to take an evening dose of low-dose naltrexone, 3 milligrams Dr. Bahari gave them, but I found some that were better on 4.5 and some were better on 6 milligrams. So I gave them 3, 4.5 or 6 milligrams of low-dose naltrexone every evening, and overnight that boosted their endorphins by 250 to 300%, and they woke up the next day feeling great with all those endorphins and able to avoid taking heroin or opioid painkillers. And they carried the RMN in their pocket just in case they were tempted, but they mostly didn't need it anymore in the day, provided they had low-dose naltrexone at night. Yeah, so what I wanted to do was to learn to treat all the mental health disorders and all the addictions with non-addictive medicines. And I found I could do that. I found non-addictive, effective treatment for all the mental health illnesses and all the addictions which didn't require health department approvals, which they wouldn't give me. A major event in that was that I read the book, the end of my, what was it? A book written by a New York cardiologist who had a terrible anxiety problem and a terrible alcohol problem. And he had been taken every treatment for alcoholism he could find, and he'd always relapsed within a day or two. He'd been to the 3 best detox rehabs and always relapsed. But there was a very old medicine called baclofen, a 1920s medicine, believe it or not, 1920s medicine for epilepsy. But they got better medicines for epilepsy, so they stopped using baclofen for epilepsy, but it was still the best medicine for muscle spasms. And paraplegics and quadriplegics get a lot of terrible muscle spasms. When you get old like me, you get muscle spasms as well. I have to take some of this stuff every night, or I get cramps in my feet and legs. Anyway, a New York woman doctor had a paraplegic man who was a cocaine addict, and he had not been able to stop cocaine. And when he got muscle spasms, she gave him baclofen for his muscle spasms, and then he quit the cocaine. So the baclofen, epilepsy medicine, muscle relaxant medicine helped him to stop cocaine. So this got written up in the New York newspapers, and this cardiologist, Oliver Amerson, Dr. Oliver Amerson, professor of cardiology, by that time he'd had to stop practicing because he just wasn't safe because of his alcoholism. But he read in the New York papers how baclofen had stopped this man's cocaine addiction. So he thought, oh well, got nothing to lose, he'll see if baclofen stops his alcohol addiction. And it did. He had to take large doses of baclofen, but it completely stopped his alcoholism. And it also stopped his anxiety. And he then wrote the book The End of My Addiction. I'm not absolutely sure that's the name. It was The End of My... Yeah, I think The End of My Addiction. Anyway, Dr. Oliver Amerson. And I read that book, and then I thought, I'm going to give my patients with addictions baclofen. So gradually I found a complete range of about 15 medicines that were all except one out of patent, so they were cheap, that would treat all the mental health and all the addiction problems. But when I was 76 I retired. I just couldn't cope anymore with the persecution of the health department. They more or less forced me into retirement. They weren't worried about the addicts, they weren't worried about the mentally sick people, they were just worried about their jobs. Their lovely 9 to 5, Monday to Friday jobs. No after hours clinics, no after hours services. If an addict or mentally health, if an addict is sick after hours, go to the big hospital casualty department. It's a big hospital casualty department, they just get chucked back out on the street. Disaster. So I started to develop tools because what I could see was that many people with mental health illnesses got no help, especially the poorer ones. The more well-to-do ones could get private psychiatrists and psychologists with high fees and get treatment. And if they weren't an addict, they could, on the end of a fairly long waiting list, get seen at a government mental health clinic. But if they're an addict, their goose was cooked. And I've now got 10. In the last 22 years I've developed 10 tools that people can do self-help. What I realised eventually, took me a long time, I'm a bit of a slow learner, but what I eventually realised is that mental health has to be self-help. A lot of it has to be self-help. If there's nobody to help you, you have to help yourself. But you need good tools, and the tools were crap. The mental health tools were crap. There were two. There was medicines, and so many medicines were addictive. The pharmaceutical industry didn't want you to get better and stop taking their medicine, so they made as many medicines as possible addictive. So almost all the anxiety, worry medicines, almost all the sleep medicines, and the three main medicines for ADD, ADHD, all addictive. And they made the medicine slow. They made most medicines tablets and capsules which you swallow and absorb through your gut. But it takes half an hour to an hour, and you need a drink to wash the tablet, and it goes right down. It takes half an hour to an hour to start to get into your bloodstream, to start to help you, and 1 to 2 hours to help you strongly. And 1 to 2 hours is just too long. if you're having panic attacks, or if you're having social phobia, or if you're craving heroin, or you're craving alcohol, you're craving cocaine or whatever. Yeah, so with tablets, they're so slow that you don't take them when you need them. You have to take them 3 times a day in case you need them. So they sold a hell of a lot more tablets that way. Do you know that every year in the world, $42 billion is spent on mental health and addiction medicines? $42 billion. Wow. So very quickly, the tools that I developed to help people. The first one is videos. The fastest, easiest, most convenient, lowest cost way to understand your mental illness is to see a video on it. And originally I had 31 10-minute videos, but they stopped looking at 10-minute videos, so now I've got 83 1-minute videos. And 83 1-minute videos covers virtually everything. And then I had to have websites. People had to find these videos somewhere, and I had a website called mentalhealthvideos.com, and it was, like most of my stuff, too long and too complicated, about 14 pages. And then I realized I had to have a shorter website, so now that website's still there, mentalhealthvideos.com, and it's well worth looking at if you're patient. But if you've got a short attention span, which a lot of people with these problems have, then go to smilefixit.com. Smilefixit.com. Smilefixit.com got everything on 1.5 pages, and you just tap the item that's interesting to you, and it takes you straight to the short video that's best for your particular problems. So videos, websites, an app. I started to use a checklist because I was so busy. I just couldn't cope with it all, and I made a 20-question checklist and got an assistant to see the patient first and do the checklist, and then I could do as much in about 15 minutes as it took me 30 or 40 minutes without the checklist. But checklists are tedious and take too long, and eventually we realized we had to have an app. There were apps everywhere. We had to have an app, but apps, a lot of work and very expensive. But eventually I got very lucky and found a very smart Russian student doing his Masters of Information Technology who helped me make the Mental Fixit app. The Mental Fixit app, which cost me about 1/6 what it would have cost me to get made by the usual companies. So we've got the Mental Fixit app, and you can download that onto your phone. Either go to the App Store and download it on your iPhone, or on Android go to Google Play and download the free Mental Fixit app, and you can do that app in about 5 minutes, and it tells you which 6 of our 1-minute videos will help you most. And the next tool is live streaming. I do live streaming 4 times a week. That's what we're doing now on Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and it was Sunday at 7 p.m. Perth time. I was catering for Australia, but then we ended up, we sometimes got a third of the people watching were from the Northern Hemisphere, and 7 p.m. Perth time is 7 a.m. New York time and 4 a.m. LA time, and God knows what time in London and Sweden and Denmark, where there were people watching. So now I do the Sunday session 9 a.m. Perth time, which is in the evening in the Northern Hemisphere. And I used to do an hour and a quarter, and I used to have 3,000 or 4,000 viewers but it got too much for me, and now I mostly only do 3/4 of an hour, and I repeat myself a lot because there's only a certain amount you can talk about. So usually a lot of people have seen this stuff so many times that they stop looking, but we've got 5,600 followers and over 40,000 likes, and we still usually get about 1,000 viewers per 3/4 of an hour session. But what I'm really excited about now, so the fourth tool is live streaming. The fifth tool was powder medicine, because if you drop powder medicine on your tongue and suck it, don't swallow, it starts to work in 5 minutes. Your tongue is pink or red because the blood vessels are so close to the surface, and you drop these thousands of tiny granules of powder medicine on your tongue and suck it, it gets into your bloodstream in 5 minutes. It starts to give you relief. And after a couple of weeks, as soon as you taste the medicine, it starts to work. So that's much better if you're trying to cut back or to prevent an anxiety attack or a panic attack, or craving for alcohol or craving for heroin or whatever. If the medicine starts to work in seconds, that's much better. So powder medicine. But taking powder medicine out of a bottle with a scoop was a bit clumsy, so my sixth tool is pocket dispensers. So we put the powder in pocket dispenser and you have it in your pocket. Whatever you need for your particular problems, whether it's anxiety or it's heroin or it's attention deficit or whatever, you got it in your pocket. And wherever you are, even driving a car, if you start to feel the need for the medicine, you can just whiz it out and drop some on your tongue. And in 10 minutes it's working. It starts to work straight away, and in 10 minutes working quite strongly. So powder dispensers. The seventh tool was a heartbeat meditation aid, which is just a shortened doctor's stethoscope, because meditation is a wonderful aid for people with mental health and addiction problems, but the people who need it most often can't learn to meditate. It's just too hard, because in meditation you focus on your breathing, and that helps you to stop focusing on your troubles. But your breathing is not very attention grabbing, but your heartbeats are loud and clear and very interesting. So now with a heartbeat meditation aid, which is just a shortened doctor's stethoscope, that's the listening part, you just listen to your heart like that, and it's pretty easy to focus on your loud heartbeats, and that helps you to forget about your troubles, and that gives you the rest and the relaxation and the rejuvenation, which is what is so good about meditation. The ninth tool, which I'll just mention, is phone treasure. Phone treasure is a lovely thing on your phone that you can use to focus on, to make and break habits. But the 10th thing, which I'm really excited about, which I'm very close to having up, is what I call Scroll Plus. Because what I realized was that mental health has to be brought to the masses through the things that the masses like, and that's phones, videos, scrolling. TikTok's only 9 years old, but they have over 1 billion viewers a month. Over 1 billion viewers a month, because people love scrolling. According to the ChatGPT search I did, they love scrolling because it boosts their mood, it tickles their imagination, and they learn all sorts of interesting, creative things, and it's addictive. So I thought, my tool has got to include scrolling. But the problem with scrolling is you get no detail. You race through so much, but you don't get any detail, and you need detail. but you don't want detail about everything. When I was a medical student, the medical textbook had 1,200 pages, a lot of detail about a lot of things. And you might only, if you're sick, there might only be 10 or 15 pages of the 1,200 pages that were relevant for what your problem was. So what you want to do, you want to be able to race through or scroll through and find the bits that are important for you, and then you need to get information on the bits. So my 10th tool, which I think will be way the best tool, and I hope will go global, is Scroll Plus. And Scroll Plus is 92 wants, needs, solutions. Mental health wants, needs, solutions. Mental health and addiction wants, needs and solutions. 92. And you can scroll through those 92 items in about 6 minutes. Every time you come to one that's important to you, you can just tap on it and you get an instant 6 to 16 second video that tells you about it. Now, 6 to 16 seconds isn't very long, but that's enough to be really helpful. So you go scrolling through, you scroll through the 92, or whenever you want to, you can stop. Whenever you want to, you can stop and press the enough button, and it gives you the list of the videos that you've actually watched, which tells you the items that you've covered so far that are important to you. And you can then see those video texts that you watched, and each one has a link to a 1-minute video. So scroll through as many items as you like, find the ones that are important, see a 6 to 16 second video. If that's helpful, then see a 1-minute video. If that's helpful, then do the Mental Fix It app, and the Mental Fix It app report immediately tells you the 6 of our 83 videos that will help you most. So the Scroll Plus tool, so far we think it'll have 4 items. There'll be the actual Scroll Plus check, and then there's an e-book, an audio book, and a lengthy video. The e-book is up. You can find Scroll Plus e-book at Amazon. And I'm sorry I'm charging for that. The first thing I've charged for, I want to make it as much as free as possible, but I need to get some money to fund the marketing, because I want to spread this stuff all over the world. It's time 50,000 Americans a year didn't die from addictive painkillers. So we've got to get to America. We want to get to the UK and Canada and then China, and then India, and then the Spanish-speaking countries, and then the French-speaking countries. So within a few days, you can go to my website, smilefixit.com, smilefixit.com, and in 10 minutes free you can do the scroll and watch some videos, and 10 minutes after you take your phone out of your pocket, you know a lot about what your problems are, and you just keep on doing that. And you go to the doctor or the psych, and you talk about things, and when you walk out the door you're confused, and you can't ask them questions again till your next appointment in a week or a fortnight or a month. But with videos, you watch it. If you don't get it the first time, you watch it again. You can watch it 3 times, and then next day you can watch it another 3 times. You can watch it as many times as you can until you understand it. So this package of tools, I won't tell you about the 11th tool because I'm a bit unclear about that, but the 10 tools are going to be available very soon. Yeah, as soon as I finish tonight, I'll be working on the Scroll Fix-It program, which I hope you'll be able to do at smilefixit.com in 2 or 3 days' time. Well, that's enough for me for tonight. It's Friday night. I'll be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Perth time, and on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Perth time, whatever time that is wherever you are. If you've got any comments, questions, or criticisms, please send them to me through the platform that you watch the videos on. Tonight I had a problem, and I don't think that this is on Facebook. It's certainly on TikTok, and I believe on YouTube, and I think on Instagram, but I just couldn't get the Facebook to work. But hopefully tomorrow I'll get it to work. Or you can email me. I always respond to emails. So I'll respond to any comments, questions, criticisms that you send me, and to any emails. And the email address is healthestuff@gmail.com, healthestuff@gmail.com, and you can find that email address at smilefixit.com, smilefixit.com. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll be back again tomorrow at 7.